In 1983, Nintendo released a boxing arcade game that became an international hit. They followed this up in 1984 with a sequel that introduced some iconic characters for the series that continued onto the NES in 1987 with a certain celebrity final boss, the Super Nintendo in 1994, and finally a Wii release 15 years later in 2009. Punch-Out has had an incredible legacy full of amazing fighters that are still celebrated today. This episode is not about them. See, in 1985, there was an arcade spin-off by Nintendo called Arm Wrestling, with a similarly colorful yet curtailed cast of characters. There's also the 1992 Beam Software game Power Punch 2, which follows the non-existent Power Punch 1. It's a complicated story, but the gist is that it was an intended sequel to the NES Punch-Out that didn't come to fruition under Nintendo supervision. Finally, there's George Foreman's KO Boxing, another title from Beam that hit multiple platforms and followed a similar style of gameplay to Little Mac's Underdog Crusade. These are the games we'll be talking about in this year's season premiere of Violent Profiles. I'm Eric J. Chucky, and welcome to the show where we discuss obscure fighting games and the rosters that define them. Before we get started, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It tickles the algorithm, and who doesn't want to tickle Don Cheadle? As much as I loved the NES, I didn't really play Punch-Out as a kid. I have very foggy early memories of being at somebody's house watching them play it on an old cabinet TV with the wood paneling, but I couldn't even tell you who that person was, much less outline my impression of the game. Instead, my exposure to Soda Popinski and the rest of the crew was through the 1987 official Nintendo Player's Guide, a book I loved so dearly that I kept it even after the cover fell off and the pages inflated due to me dropping it in the tub. I took it basically everywhere with me, well into the 90s, pretending to navigate the maps and analyzing the enemies from Metroid and Ghosts and Goblins. What a good book. Anyway, my first experience playing Punch-Out was actually just a few years ago thanks to the Nintendo Switch Online Classics collections. And you know what? It's really good. Hard as hell, but simple to pick up and play, satisfying to land a hit and especially to knock someone out. Well deserving of its legacy. I hadn't even heard of the trio of games we're covering today until last year, thanks to me binging NES Friends' entire archive. I was immediately smitten with the over-the-top designs and excited to share them with you all as soon as possible. We have the good fortune to cover 30 fighters today, or 49 if you're being incredibly generous, because there's only one character for story mode and very little backstory to each fighter otherwise. Even still, there's a lot to get through, so let's get to it, starting with Arm Wrestling. Your first opponent is the stud horse Texas Mac. He's sort of your training round, teaching you to mash left on the joystick until the game tells you to hit right, which throws Mac off his rhythm and lets you bludgeon the button for bonus points and a little extra power. Repeat until his hand is on the table, but you'd better do it within a minute or you lose. It's not terribly difficult to grasp, but like Punch-Out, there's a timing minigame aspect with more gimmicky stuff for you to engage with as you progress, so you're not just seeing who can mash a directional button faster between you and the over-the-top version of Deep Blue. If you screw up the timing minigame, the opponent gets a pretty big advantage and sometimes just wins outright, but the game gives you a few replays for your quarter, so that's nice. I didn't use a quarter, to be clear. I played this on MAME. It's 2024. Do you think I know where to find an arcade cabinet of arm wrestling? I do, the Galloping Ghost Arcade, obviously, but that's quite a trip for me, so emulation it is. Next up is special guest from Japan, Kabuki, here catfishing you into thinking he resembles E Honda, while this is his actual face, which brings me great joy. And look at those sumo titties fly. I appreciate the animation in this game a lot, very exaggerated and entertaining, which is a great call since most of this game is you watching two homies struggle for control over a handshake. Should you win the whole shebang, Kabuki comes back to challenge you in the final round of defending your championship. Again, like Punch-Out, each bout is a bit more difficult the second time through, with a new mechanic on the button mashing portion I like to call... Hang on, don't mash the button for a second? Okay, go. On the topic of the champ, our nameless protagonist here is a green-haired goon wearing a tank top with a V on it over a sweater, which is certainly a look. He resembles the pugilist from the original Punch-Out, not Little Mac, this guy, and that's all I got. He's probably unrelated to the OG, just a similar look for a generic player avatar, but folks do put a lot of effort into connecting the three online. I guess a lot of people want to believe Punch-Out characters are in this game, which is just patently ridiculous. Take our next opponent, for example. I keep seeing listicles online talking about Mask X here being Bald Bull, like it's the new Super Mario 2's Doki Doki Panic factoid. But you need to respect the truth. Bald Bull is a Turkish boxer. Mask X is clearly a Lucha Libre-inspired arm wrestler. Mask X tries at every opportunity to headbutt you during arm wrestling, and Bald Bull won't headbutt anyone until his victory scene in 2009's Punch-Out for the Wii. So clearly, Mask X is a tough opponent whose identity is not... Oh my god. That's Steve Harvey. Your next challenge is a robot named Ape 3, controlled by a young woman called Alice. You might be asking yourself, why has our ordinary arm wrestling competition gone so suddenly off the rails? How, in a game where if you start arm wrestling too soon you get disqualified, is this legal? Why are they so insistent about only being good friends? That's suspicious. Methinks Ape 3 doth protest too much. This fight is a bit more complex as Alice blasts Ape 3 with arm wrestling brainwaves to make him nearly tear your arm off. Thankfully he goes for this magnet, which you can grab at the perfect time to completely disable him, which I guess is also legal for some reason. I don't know, man, I just work here. He also makes this noise, so... yeah. The final member of this Flex Fest is Frank Jr.
So, what kind of things do you like to do at home?
Melt stuff.
This arm wrestling circuit started out pretty normal, but, here we are, I guess, grappling a bolt-necked flesh golem. Above and beyond being a tough opponent, Frank pulls the wait don't do anything trick before cranking your arm all the way to the right, or breathing fire at you.
Yeah.
Win against Frank, and the organizer here throws a big sack of money at you, which you earn buku points for catching. The game keeps going until you lose, or for 20 total rounds, at which point the organizer says he's run out of money to give away. Time to give somebody else a turn at the machine. We ain't gonna make quarters with you hogging it all the time. While arm wrestling is charming, if not terribly complicated, Power Punch 2 is bad. It lacks all the rhythm of Punch-Out, the sprites are just not as good, but we've gone through a season of this show, you know the deal. There was some serious ambition in some of this game's mechanics and ideas, and it's a shame the execution wasn't there. For example, you begin training against an android who looks amusingly similar to Frank Jr. from arm wrestling, and whose head pops off like a Rock'em Sock'em robot. He'll help you grind up your stats before you pursue the title. There's also a proper scoring system per round, and you can collect these bouncing boxing gloves to store up to 4 devastating power punches. Holy wow, that's the title of the game. Who you play as is undefeated Olympian and 8-year undisputed heavyweight champion boxer Mark Tough Guy Tyler, who was hastily changed from Mike Tyson after certain events to look a bit more like Muhammad Ali. His manager sprites were similarly shorn to demote him from Don King to Don Rickles. Yeah, it's Don Rickles alright. Mark's recent 9th title defense, only 9? I guess we can see how he stayed champ for so long, is witnessed by Gordo the Titanium Jaw Gloop, retired boxer and hair thief who has since become a promoter for the Intergalactic Boxing Federation, which is for some reason abbreviated IGBF. He invites Tyler and his manager into space to see just how tough the tough guy is against the best the galaxy has to offer. The prize? Becoming the undisputed champion of the universe, which is a hell of a lot cooler sounding than being the undisputed WWE Universal Champion. Ooh woo! Power Punch 2 also has a lot more in the way of character development compared to arm wrestling. Each of these bizarre-looking monstrosities has a full bio in the manual and a brief in the game, starting with your first opponent, 9763 Borg. He was a simple transporter pilot from Anargulon 5 in the Inner Colonies until he was involved in a head-on collision, which is a cry for more clearly defined space roads if I've ever heard one. We yada yada past the important parts and now he's a cyborg boxer with a demeaning name. How did he get into boxing? Need to pay off medical debts from getting all his chrome? Saw that his new body was capable of so much more than loading and unloading crates for Space Amazon? Did he always want to be a boxer but wasn't tough enough before? Was his name Borg before the accident in an ironic twist of fate? These are the questions we yearn for answers to. The game bio describes him as a showboat, and the manual says he has an auto repair system and a clear reach advantage, each claim more spurious than the last. He even comes back later with improvements as Super Borg DLX, though admittedly they don't seem to have done much. In fact, it seems like an even easier battle than the first. Is it placed out of order in the game's fight list? I wouldn't know. Not only is this game bad, but I am bad at it. Derek Nodden is Eric Nodden's older brother. I'll forgive you for not knowing who Eric Nodden is because we haven't fought him yet. Apparently the younger Nodden's career has been more successful than the elder, but Derek wants to prove himself against Mark Tyler in hopes of parlaying that victory into a title bout against his sibling. Derek is a Buglin from Nilfheim 23, and given the name, I was expecting him to look a lot more like an insect than Mr. Lordy with big floppy cartoon feet. When you knock him down, homie does a few push-ups before getting back up to fight. Impressive. Our next competitor is Alpha Bonehead, who is probably going to be pretty disappointed to learn his name doesn't sound as cool as he thinks it does. Years of exposure to deadly radiation as a nuclear fuel pump attendant did not kill this native of the Ontarius Center, instead making him tougher, uglier, and I assume greener. I like Alpha's swagger as he moseys across the screen, and his eyebrow game is unmatched. When you punch him to the ground, he stares up into the eyes of an unforgiving god and asks why before returning to his feet to box once more. This is the first bout to take place in a brown arena, I assume because Alpha is the solar champion, your first boss on the way to the top. This makes it much clearer that the guy next to Don Rickles is supposed to be Geordie LaForge. Keen. Member of the Intergalactic Riot Force and fighting out of Xylox 17, our second cyborg Helmut Skull sounds like the name of a super American villain. Which is fitting since the IRF spends their time cruising around the galaxy causing trouble, and boxing is just what Helmut does for fun. Despite some largely mediocre sprite work, you'll find that when you knock him on the ground, Helmut's helmet falls off, and there are actually frames of him putting it back on when he gets up. His goggles also jostle down onto his face when he swings with his skeletal right hand sometimes. This is the charm I'm talking about when we look at these old games. Can you imagine a goofy character like this given the same AAA treatment as a proper Punch-Out boxer? The world cries justice for Helmut Skull, and Nintendo whispers, no. Lex Lump Blocker is, kind of cute. I mean, ignoring the unibrow and restored Ecce Homo hairstyle, those are some flirty, pouty lips, and both eyes have sort of a mysterious allure to them, even if they are two remarkably different eyes. Anyway, the lore tells us Lex was the sparring partner for the previous IGBF champion, whoever that was, and is now trying to find his own way in the circuit. He hails from Satellite Lex, which I can't decide would be more fun if his people's culture is to take their first name from their home, like I would be Earth J Chucky, or that the whole satellite is like an intergalactic Lex Express. In the ring, whoa! I take back what I said. Oh, no, he looks like Slash from Eternal Champions and Blanca from Street Fighter had a baby, and the baby was born with a very rare and tragic deformity. He looks like something Rob Liefeld drew on accident from the waist up, and then shrugged and used for practice to draw feet. He looks like a 9-year-old Slash man Gajinka. Take him away. Grathnox is a retired military vet in the Cyber Tank Corps who really wanted to take up boxing. He's pretty good at it, but the game says he's getting soft around the middle in his old age. I don't know that that's a problem when your legs are replaced with tank treads. Look at him. Look at when you knock him down. He's perfect. I don't know how Mark Tyler isn't getting his feet run over by this beer-bellied BattleBot, but whatever. He's got one of the best-looking sets of animations I've seen in this game, with his little angry punch rush, and the way they actually bothered to animate his treads even though the tank never changes direction from its three-quarter view. Bravissimo. He's another combatant you fight again later as Grathnox 4B, although the manual calls him Rakes B2, while still describing him as the same being you fought before. And again, it's pretty much the same fight, same treads, same do-rag, same unnecessary jerk-off motion. He actually seems slower somehow. Even the manual is at a loss for this one. He's been down before, so it's possible it could happen again. Great vote of confidence. How about some respect for our freaking veterans, huh? Both the manual and the in-game bio for younger brother Eric Nodden give you advice on how to avoid his relentless assault and exploit his weaknesses, but it's pretty much just punch him really hard and try not to get punched, the same as it's been with every other fight. He telegraphs way less than his older brother, so at least he has the honor of being the first fight against a clone sprite that's actually more difficult. Unfortunately, he's also the first fight against a clone sprite chronologically, so he's setting you up for some severe disappointment. He doesn't have a developed backstory, he's just better than Derek, which I'm sure does wonders for the elder brother's self-esteem. Interestingly, the manual has Eric as orange and Derek as gray, whereas in-game they're pink and orange, respectively. Is that interesting? Probably not. Pugly Positronic doesn't have a lot of backstory provided to us. He's a biped XL from Red Moon 2, but with a visual like this, you don't need a thorough bio. And let me be clear, this is a grotesque sprite. Not only in that Pugly isn't much of a looker, but also in that his movements and shading are just inexplicably bad, even compared to a lot of the other sprites in this game. But he is the image that inspired me to cover this game on Violent Profiles in the first place, so he at least deserves props for that. Next up is Hammerhand, a dwarf from Nilfheim 6 who peeks over an invisible fence like Space Dwarf Kilroy. He's another delightfully unique fight, jumping around the screen with alacrity before hitting you with a double axe handle, and when you knock him down, his horn thing gets stuck in the mat and he has to wiggle himself free to get to his feet. Delightful. Hammerhand has some of the most clever graphics of anyone in the game, much better than— No, get out of here, lump blocker. The manual doesn't even say you come back. What are you doing here? Are you somehow more glitchy looking? Ugh. I'm not talking about you again. Let's talk about the Bikini Slug Sign Girl. She's my favorite. Got her makeup all done, leaving that subtle slime trail. And what's a slug need a bikini for? She doesn't have nipples. Superb. Alright, this video's already a long one. Let's hit that final roadblock in Tyler's quest, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the universe, fighting Flymo. He has, hands down, The worst bio sprite. The NES notoriously has more shades of blue than any other color, and yet they've decided to shade my guy Mo with light purple. Even his in-game sprite inexplicably muddies up the cyan with a similar shade of blue, neglecting the lighter cyan used on his fist globes and UFO body. Yeah, that's right. This guy has a mohawk, sunglasses, fist globes, and a UFO body, and they still manage to make him disappointing. His animations are also herky-jerky, and he just lacks even an ounce of the intimidating charisma of Mike Tyson, or the smooth swagger of the original Punch-Out's Piston Hurricane. Beat him and you become the champ. Or just enter a code on the Prepare to Fight Against screen and let the game beat itself for you. Oh, also, as of 2019, you can buy this game on Steam for $7. I mean, don't. It's not fun, but you could. Last game for the day, it's George Foreman's KO Boxing. This came out on the Genesis, Master System, Game Gear, NES, and Super NES. We'll be playing the lastmost version as it's the best looking, and I like watching nice footage while I edit. But I would like to point out that the Master System and Game Gear versions are a completely different side-view style traditional fighting game, based mechanically on James Buster Douglas knockout boxing, for whatever reason. All of these games are underwhelming, but I find the presentation better than Power Punch 2, despite them all coming out within the same calendar year. I don't know what the hell was going on with Beam Software in 1992 exactly, but the Aussies were working their asses off to bring us the greatest number of subpar boxing games they could muster. The characters in the Game Gear and Master System versions don't have bios that I can find. F. Nelson, G. Steele, G. Brown, and T. Lewis are all just generic boxers for George Foreman to devour like so much deliciously grilled cheeseburger. I'm also not covering the life and career of the boxing legend himself, as I am woefully underqualified and disinclined to talk about anything that isn't a fictitious pile of pixels. There's not much to say about the rest of these guys either. Even though many of them are actually playable in versus mode, they're all just generic boxers. But damn it, I said I was going to talk about him, so let's get to it. Lorenzo Bullet Luciano is a journeyman nicknamed for his lightning-quick jabs and fast footwork. He's been around the block and his face looks like a meme. Tornado Tony Collins is making his first appearance in this unnamed Doritos-sponsored boxing federation since receiving severe punishment after his last fight. What for? It's not elaborated on. Maybe a bit of his hair bleach was stuck to his dome and he was fined for non-regulation unguents making his head too slick. Boxing rules are meticulously specific. The boss, Renko Fujioka, lacks knockout power but has nonetheless had a brilliant amateur career. He's from the Far East, unless you're in Japan, in which case he's from the close here. Sonny Joe Dukes looks like a clay fighter reject with non-regulation hair and is described as not one of the greats. Hurtful. Earthquake Harley only has one given name and wears a beret. I don't think Dorito World Boxing has the same regulations as normal boxing. How did Tony Collins get suspended? Nobody knows how Earthquake got his nickname, but maybe you should ask him. He seems friendly enough. Terrible Turok is a former pro wrestler that doesn't look that terrible. I think he looks like a real sweetheart. Lance the Sheik Bork is definitely not pro wrestling legend the Iron Sheik. Please ignore that he's described as a legendary veteran with a temper and also his face. Eddie the Pirate Preston doesn't care for small talk, and I guess that's why we don't know anything about him. Beautiful Bobby Crane isn't in the NES version, I guess. He's also a model. Please don't hit him in the face. Thank you. Miguel Valdez comes from a long line of circus acrobats, which I suppose is why they call him Crazy. Or maybe that's just his favorite Patsy Cline song. Crazy. A seasoned boxer who fought his way out of the pubs in Ireland, Irish Tommy Morton has been alcohol-free since 1991, and we're very proud of him even though his hair is the same color as his skin. Tyrone Madman Mosley can do anything. Don't try to figure him out, it's impossible. That's not even me zazzing, that's what his bio actually says. Larry the Surgeon Scott earned his nickname because of the surgical disposal of his opponents and jabs that cut like a knife. He is Patrick Ewing without a mustache. I am not currently accepting feedback. Just kidding, please comment, cause algorithm. Ray the Iceman Armstrong is so named because he always insists on wearing a sweater in the ring. Just kidding, that would be interesting. He feels no emotion or pain and he's cold and calculated. Finally, the boss of the game, Brixton Mohawk Morris is an Englishman who rarely knows defeat. Teach him the meaning of pain, and George gets to hold up the great big championship in victory. Special shout out to the referee, Lester the Unlikely. Look at that slouch. No special shout out to the ring girl. Not a slug, not hot. 0 out of 10. Will I ever cover the main Punch-Out cast that we all know and love? I don't know. I could, I guess. Do you want me to? Let me know in the comments. I'm certainly not doing it right now. That was a lot. Next time on Violent Profiles won't be so much. But if you know the name Vic Takai like I do, you know it's sure to be entertaining. Don't forget to hit up our Patreon at the $5 tier like all the names currently on screen. Your name will join them, and you'll get episodes a whole month early. Until next time, white out.